This here on Para X Radio. Today my guest is Marilyn Hughes. Her website is outofbodytravel.org, and I really will encourage you to go over there and just peruse through her website, because it is just an incredible website and the information there is really, really good. Welcome, Marilyn. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you, Christine. I appreciate the invite.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I want to get into everything. We have the 2 hours. Thank you for doing the 2 hours, because there's so much that I'm interested in that you work with and you write about. I want to direct everybody to outofbodytravel.org, Marilyn Hughes, and if you go over to the website, you can see what I'm talking about. I think a lot of people misunderstand it's astral projection that you do. Is that fine to say that? I see that you write about the Catholicism, and in the light of that faith, I don't want to misspeak, but it's like astral projection?
It's, yeah, similar to astral projection. The biggest thing is, if you want to get really tight on terminology, when you're talking about astral travel or astral projection, you're referring to a singular realm, the fourth realm, whereas out-of-body travel includes the heavens, the purgatories, the hells, which are all, and there's an infinite number of those. So part of the reason I go with out-of-body travel is because it kind of covers everything.
All right. I'm gonna just back you up a little bit. There's an infinite number of out-of-body realms.
Yes, there are. An infinite number of heavens, an infinite number of purgatories, and an infinite number of hells. For every possible configuration that you can see in a soul, a realm will be born for its purification. Some of these are purgatorial, and then some of them are really low realms, the dark, deep, hellish realms, where souls are much more trapped by their own diminishments than anything else. But even so, assistance is sent to them on a fairly regular basis as well.
That makes sense to me, and I think it makes sense to a lot of my listeners. One of the things that's going to benefit those of you who are listening is, I think that you, Marilyn, you have an understanding of those other realms, where in some, I don't want to be rude, some maybe more doctrinal religions, they only have an understanding of like one or two.
Well, I think though, it's interesting, because if you read the mystics, the writings of the mystics throughout time, I think that many of the mystics understood this, and they wrote about it in their writings. But you're right that, like in Catholicism, they'll talk about heaven, hell, and purgatory. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a singular, but many of the saints and many of the mystics, not just Catholic, throughout the world in all traditions, have had experiences indicating the multiplicity of our universe, and how there are all these infinite extensions. I think people would be really surprised to see how vast all of this really is, so much further beyond what we can really comprehend in our human minds. Just like St. Paul said, eye has not seen nor ear heard what God has prepared. It is very much like that. And so there is just, whatever you can imagine, it's so much more. Whatever you can think, it's so much deeper. Whatever you can wish for, it's so much greater.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like the Catholic aspect that you have. I like the Christian aspect that you have in your spiritual work, because I think a lot of times for me, people will say to me, well, if somebody comes to you and they're a client and they have a dark energy or a dark entity, only the churches can help, and only somebody who's ordained, which I understand ordination. I understand that passed down of, I don't want to say power, but authority.
Right, the authority and the anointing of the hands that the priests have. Absolutely. And when people say that, I think it's partly because they don't understand the full scope of what has to occur in a situation like this. Many priests, and I used to work for the Catholic Church for a period of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. Can't remember quite how long. And priests would often have other people like myself and other people help with a lot of the details. The priest, an exorcism, sure, and they would be called in for a blessing of the people and the persons. But like people like myself, the priests didn't have the time to literally just sit with them for hours while they were going through some of their crises, or just be there, or be at the beckon of a phone call when they were having a problem in the middle of the night. And so it was always a team effort. And even from what I understand about the exorcists, they have prayer teams, they have teams of people that support and give comfort and also upliftment. And the prayer teams are really, really important in that. So I think that might be part of a misunderstanding, in that we all do play a role in that body of Christ. And when someone is undergoing something as serious as an actual possession, or even the less serious manifestations, the obsessions and all of those things, they need a lot of prayer. They need a lot of upliftment, because it's not just like in one fell swoop, 1 second, that everything stops. After that demon is expelled by the priest, there's a great deal of prayer effort and a great deal of support that is given to the person to make sure it doesn't come back.
I know, and it happened to me many years ago, and that was one of the problems, because it's one of the worst things that any human being could go through. And because of situations that I don't need to get into, because it's your show, it's your time now, there wasn't the support. So, people, I don't know how many calls you get or consultations you're asked for, but there's a lot of people who are suffering from that, some type of manifestation, some type of negative energy, and the way that you say it is so perfect. It's like, I wish I could say it that good, but I go on and on and on.
Well, I do hear from a lot of people who are undergoing some type of demonic situations, and a lot of people who are undergoing exorcisms, at the hands of Catholic priests in their own respective locations and dioceses. And it's a very, very difficult process. A lot of times it takes multiple exorcisms. I've got some people where it's been going on for several years, and they're just having difficulty with removing the demonic force. And it's not like something where, like a medication where you give the medication and it's just cured. It's something where a lot of prayer has to go into it, and also a lot of discernment and being open to watching how the person who's under the influence responds to the different things that you do, because each situation is different. And ironically as well, the reasons that people become possessed are different, and that can affect the impact of how an exorcism might be performed, or whether or not it's a situation where deliverance prayers are going to be all that person needs at that time versus an exorcism. So there's a lot of variations in between. It's not a real cut and dry thing. A big part of the process, even mystically, is going in to discern what is the energetic truth about that situation, which would indicate to us what brought the spirit in, why is the spirit attached, what is going on that the soul might be doing that could encourage it to stay, what is the, and then there's just so many different factors. It can come from being exposed to a place where a demonic force is simply present, and someone can become, a prey to that type of attack, without even realizing it's coming on, which that sounded a lot like your story, Christine, from what I was able to see on Paranormal Survivor, that you were in a place that had this demonic force there. And was that, would you say that that's what happened in your case?
Yes. I feel that there was like portals that were opened, whether they were done by my family or whether they were just there and then it was exacerbated because there was abuse and alcoholism and all those other negative things. And I was gifted, because I come from a gifted family, psychically gifted, and it just was the worst place at the worst time.
Right.
That's what happened, yeah.
Well, and that's a really good point too, is that people who have a natural gifting in the psychic area are more likely to be affected by this sort of thing as well. But then, you know, you have situations also that are different in that, like, for instance, when either violence or abuse is perpetrated upon another person, or rape or incest or molestation, what you see in the mystical realm is that the perpetrator is actually almost like thrusting their demons onto the victim. So a victim of certain types of crimes can absolutely be impacted by the demons that implicated the attack upon them in the first place, which originated with the perpetrator. So that can happen as well. And you know, interestingly, also, you look at cases like Emily Rose,
yes,
where it seemed like she had gone to a college and there was just a succubus, incubus in that dorm room. And she was literally just an easy target. You know, she was not aware of what was going on at all. But you can also see that in a college dorm or something like that, that there could easily be a lot of incubi, succubi type of energies, because there's a lot of unmitigated sex going on, which draws those demons into that building. But who could have thought, you know, that it could get that bad as it did with Emily Rose? But, you know, we have that. And then there are the situations like with the young boy, which was portrayed, you know, the case that inspired The Exorcist, yeah. And then they did a movie following it, which I think is called Possessed, which was the true story of that case. And it was a young boy, and he had an aunt in the home who was messing around with a lot of occult practices, and then she passed on. And after she passed on, it was like she was calling in all these darker and darker spirits to really attempt to create a perfect possession in that young child. Yeah. And so, again, another case where it can be completely, you know, I think they were completely blindsided as to that this could happen to this degree, you know. They were just trying to take care of a family member in her later years, but her own alliances with dark forces became a real danger to their child.
I know. And then they Hollywoodized it, and it took away the whole, I think it didn't take all the impact away, but it took away a lot of the impact that those cases could have had for people like you who do the work, or people who are interested in getting help, you know?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things I think that is really important for those who are listening who might be dealing with these kinds of things, mystically and in the out-of-body travel state, I have seen the power of confession, of Mass, and of the sacraments of the church. And, you know, the first thing I would recommend is go straight to confession. I remember there was, and I know not everyone's Catholic, so do it in whatever way works for you, but sacramental confession is such a powerful, energetic event. I've seen where the grace of God moves through the confessional and through the person. And An exorcist once said not too long ago that confession was a much stronger sacrament than the practice of exorcism. An exorcism, I don't believe, is considered a sacrament. He called it something else. So, but going to confession and then going to Mass really could help because of you want to get some cleansing moving through your body to create like a clear field where you can try to bring something better in. You know, if you're truly in the position where you're just possessed, you need an exorcist.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who are dealing with all kinds of obsessions and various levels that are not necessarily possession. And, you know, there's ways to go through the cleansing. Another excellent practice for those who are dealing with the lesser forms would be the Divine Mercy devotions. You know, when you practice and pray the Chaplet of the Divine Mercy, it is a chaplet where Jesus promised Saint Faustina the cleansing of all your sins. And we just got through last weekend what was Divine Mercy Sunday, where every year, the week after Easter, if you go to confession and then you receive communion and go to Mass within the 7-day period of Divine Mercy Sunday, you can ask the Lord for literally baptismal purity. It's not only the remission of sins, but the remission of the punishment due to sin. And so what these things do is bring a baptismal purity, which allows for the soul to start cleansing these things out and engage in a discernment process. Certainly, I would recommend anybody go get the blessing of a priest for starters as well. If you're in a case of absolute possession, then you're going to need to talk about getting in touch with the exorcist in that diocese. That's really important.
I mean, they will, it's been 30 years, but they put me through every test, every doctor's visit. I was tested in my brain waves, my eyesight, my hearing, everything. I mean, I got a little bit perturbed with the church, but even I understand that they will really play devil's advocate. I mean, they will leave no stone unturned to make sure that it's nothing, natural that's going on.
Right. And, they do that because if someone is suffering from something else, if they have epilepsy, if they have some form of mental illness, whether it be schizophrenia or psychosis, an exorcism could actually make those things worse. And so they are very, 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 very studious about making sure on those matters because they realize that, and they know that in the past, people who needed a very different kind of help sometimes underwent things like exorcisms, and it made things worse. I think that's really important for people to know that that's why they can be so intensive, because they don't want to make a mistake and do harm. And it's a really tough line, because I've spoken with some people who are very frustrated with the process because it's just not working for them.
Yeah.
And it's just very, very difficult. It's not something that gets resolved easily or quickly. Usually it takes a lot of time. Some people are lucky and it happens with 1 or 5 exorcisms. And then there are people who continue to need the exorcisms over years and years. And these are the people that are real frustrated. And in those cases, I think there's a lot of attempts to try to discern why this force has such a stronghold in the soul. And so there's a lot of intrusive self-examination, and that can be uncomfortable.
Yes, it can, really.
Yeah.
Not just I have enough, but yeah, it really can.
Yeah, because they're asking you to look for any and everything that could be going on or that might have happened in your past that you're not remembering. that could have given this stronghold. Um, so it's a very, it's not a very private process, I guess is what I should say.
No,
Um,
it's a good what do they call an examination of consciousness? Is that what
yes.
you call it? Yeah, it really is to sit back and say, where could I have been um, participated in what happened? We don't want to feel like we let the devil in the back door, but there's always something that we do. But I had a being, I don't know what it was, didn't ask, didn't want to name, and it was with me for years. And what I had to do, I don't want to get too graphic, but people know I'm a big mouth, because it helped. When I was raped when I was young, and I held on to not unforgiveness of my abuser, but unforgiveness of myself. And I had to go through what I call a soul's, I had to go to a soul's journey. I had to go back in time and go back to where I split and I disassociated. And what had happened to me was it was holding on to my chest, excuse me for getting like metaphysical, but the heart chakra and what is the one up near the belly button, the solar plexus?
Yeah, the solar plexus.
Yeah. When I did what do they call it, the soul retrieval and the healing, and I cried and I just let go and I said, look, I was just 9 years old, I couldn't have fought. The thing just let go and went out the window. And it was just like that. Over all 30, 40 years of having that, it just let go. So there's a lot of things that gosh, you say it so, you speak of it so well, that
Thank you.
use the spiritual healing and deliverance, but sometimes it just happens where it was probably 100 times people tried to help me to get that out of there. They couldn't do it because I had to let go,
Well, and I think that's really well stated, because there are so many things that we don't want to forgive ourselves for, and we don't realize that that can actually create a stronghold. And, there are a lot of women, including myself, who experience sexual assault as young women who may need to take a closer look at that, because it is very natural to blame yourself as the victim of that type of a crime, and a lot of other crimes too. People blame themselves, or just other things that happen that don't have a great outcome, And I think it's so important for us to remember, even in one of the things my priests talk a lot about is the scrupulosity. Sometimes people can draw things in by being so scrupulous that they're literally not believing in the mercy of God, because they're so worried that if I don't say I was impatient 5 minutes ago, or that their confession will be invalid, or that their contrition is not correct. But what happens is you are not believing in the mercy of God. And if you think about that for a moment, how easily that can turn into a doorway for a demonic presence, because of course that's going to be played upon, where the demons are going to say, yeah, that's right, you can't trust in the mercy of God, you'll never be good enough, you're always going to screw up, And what it does, it's the exact opposite of what Jesus Christ said, first of all in the gospel, but then repeated to Saint Faustina in the 1930s, which brought about the divine mercy revelation and practice, which is now a feast day in the Catholic Church, 1 week after Easter. And there's the whole chaplet, which was, I want you to tell souls of my mercy and how my heart is burning to pour out my mercy on souls. That's what people need to start really hearing, is that God created us imperfectly. He knew we were going to be imperfect. He knew we were going to have flaws. He created us to be this way. And God is burning to pour out his mercy upon us. And when we allow it to, literally pour over us like the blood of Christ, it becomes much, much more difficult for strongholds to form that the demons can get a hold of. And that's part of the reason why there is so much that they will put in our heads about, oh, I'll never be good enough, I'll never be forgiven, I'll never be this, I'll never be that, I can never make up for what I did then, because that's a way to create another doorway, and then it offers the opportunity for a stronghold to form. Just like you were stuck in that moment when you were 9 years old. And I think a lot of us probably have moments that we have surrendered a little bit more of our power to than we should, in the sense of trusting in the love and mercy of God to cover us. There is a profound difference between a soul that says, a soul that's coming from an evil place is just, I really want to, mess people up, what I mean? And a soul who says, I really didn't mean to cause harm, but I realized that I did. It didn't turn out the way that I had hoped. That's where mercy can enter. This is where, one of the questions that I think is great for everyone to ask is, how many of you have ever gotten up in the morning and said, I want to screw up people's lives today. I want to hurt people.
That's true. Very true.
And so what that tells us, it tells us that the majority of humankind, with a few exceptions that we do have, where people do have evil intentions, the majority of humankind doesn't set out to make mistakes or to hurt other people. But our very human nature means that we will anyway, because we'll do things with good intentions and it'll turn out badly, or we'll just make a bad decision because we didn't think it through and it'll turn out wrong. But what we have to go back to is that intention, that we never intended to cause harm or to hurt. And then we do everything that we can to resolve issues that we may have participated in creating. And then we have to trust that God's mercy covers our humanity. It covers our inability to be perfect or to know the consequences of every dumb thing we might do. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, you say it perfectly. And when people are abused as children, those create the false thought forms, and then that brings up the strongholds. And it's almost like you have to keep chipping away at those false thought forms that created the stronghold, because it's a hard. That's why I think Jesus said, "Don't hurt children. Leave the children alone." That's why punishment is so bad for anybody who doesn't listen, because they're creating a lifelong open. I don't want to say, the aura is open, the energy field, whatever we call it, and it's just, it's really nice to hear you say that. I really appreciate you saying that, and I know a lot of people who are listening will appreciate that as well. Can you tell me how you got started in your work? Because I'm curious to see how you were led to do what you do.
Sure. When I was about, ironically, 9 years old,
Yeah.
I had a mind-blowing experience. It was so beautiful. The heavens, I was lying in bed. The heavens opened up. The clouds parted. There was a marble staircase. Angels lined the sides of the staircase. And I saw what I perceived to be God and Jesus Christ sitting in thrones at the top. And I was being compelled to walk up the staircase towards them. And it was a very involved vision, but the general essence of the experience was I was told that I had to do something, and it was important that I do it, that I do not, turn away my responsibility to do it, but that God would return to me at a later point in my life, and it would be revealed to me. And I was also shown that I would go through a lot of hardship in terms of, during my childhood, there was a lot of dark things that went on in my childhood as well, but also that I would go through a lot of hardship just because I would be different and it would be hard, but that I was to follow through and complete my mission. And so I had that beautiful experience, and I was just so blown away by it. I remember going upstairs and talking to my mom, and my family were pretty much atheists at that time, and she basically made it clear I should never speak of it again, and she was very upset about it. And so I didn't. I kept that to myself. But when I was about 22, I had my first spontaneous out-of-body experience since that time. And then it started happening regularly, and I started journaling about these experiences because it seemed like it was leading somewhere. So I started receiving instruction about the age of 22, and I was told many times that I had stuff I needed to do, and whenever I was tempted to just be like, okay, whatever, I was given a vision that would profoundly impact me in the sense of, no, you have to do this, even though you think it doesn't make sense at this time, because until things kind of unravel and unfold, sometimes things don't make much sense. You don't follow until you see the picture when it's all been finished down the road. You know what I'm saying? So I would be given a lot of guidance about, writing music that I would hear in these experiences, also writing down all the experiences. I was being shown things and taught things by different spiritual teachers and guardian angels in the angelic realms. And for a while, it was focused primarily on the light, and it was just very beautiful and peaceful and serene. There came a point in time where the Blessed Mother came down, and she said, it's time for you to learn about the dark side. And I was like, no, I really don't want to go there.
Yeah, I know.
I was like, no, thank you. But she was very stern, and she let me know that this had to happen. It was absolutely necessary. And, since that time, that was like 25 years ago, I so appreciate that the path was kind of forced upon me, because it's so important to understand this side of it in order to understand what creates the lighted side of it. You can't understand it without all of it coming together. So I started going through a period where I learned about energetic alteration, which is where you do things in the mystical realms, which will assist in changing the outcome of something on the ground that God wishes not to happen. And then we started going into where I had to learn about the purgatorial realms, the hell realms, and also about evil as a force, about Satan and the demons, which was a very difficult and uncomfortable period. But it was very important and vital in the sense of understanding that there is an energetic truth behind all of these things. And so, when you go in mystically, or you're out of your body, and you receive the energetic truth about a situation or scenario, a lot of times you can pinpoint more clearly what it is that this person is struggling with. So for instance, in the angelic realms, we have angels of virtue. We also have demons of vice. So many of the things that I would see would give me an indication like, okay, this person has a demon of greed, or a demon of vanity, or a demon of lust. A lot of lust things are out there. And obviously, when you have a lot of cases of rape and child molestation, you're going to have even more of those. So there's a lot of demons. And, within the realms of each of these categories, there are different types of oppression that you can experience from different demons. So an incubi and a succubi would be very different from what I call the gull demon, which is a more typical demon of the lust vice that you might see among people who are more promiscuous than maybe they should be.
Yeah.
And so there's all these different orders of the angels and of the demons, but what it provides is you get a window into, okay, who's bothering this person? Is it a particular, can we identify, is it a particular vice? Is it a particular throne or dominion that this person, that this demon has taken a stronghold in this person? And that helps then with the discernment process then in also giving the person some direction on the ground as to how to proceed to alter whatever it might be in their personality construct that is allowing for the ones that are there because it's compatible versus the ones that are there because somehow they've broken down the law of dominion in that person, which is where you go into the possessions.
Well, the dominions are the ones who pursue the possessions?
What they try to do is they all pursue it.
Okay.
And you can see this if you look around, I'm sorry, what?
Initiated is what I meant.
Okay. Yes, they definitely all initiate it. And what you can see is, like, even if you look at, like, there are cases like what you had experienced where this was probably more of a group of demons that resided in that building. What you also can experience are when people start to let go of their morality or their faith, and then you can see it happening very slowly in their cases where they kind of descend into this place, and all of a sudden this person might have been a very different person, and all of a sudden they're filled with anger or hatred or rage, unforgiveness. And those are all things, vengeance. All these things are the qualities of the demonic and of the evil dark side. When we look at the qualities of the Holy Spirit, that's going to be the opposite. It's going to be forgiveness, love, mercy, growth, evolution. These are some of the things that we can do in our own individual lives to discern what direction are we going. Are we finding ourselves becoming more and more angry? And this happens to all of us because life happens to all of us. So when we find that happening, do we have a spiritual practice or prayer that we go to that assists us in processing through that anger so that it can become something uplifting rather than a doorway for something dark to come in and then just take another piece of us and see if they can take us down another notch?
It's just awful.
Yes, they really are awful.
That's all they do.
Yes.
It's like their whole job, their whole existence is just to keep chipping and chipping away. And it's like, if we go one way, we can really improve and raise our vibrations and understand. But if we go the other way, it's like one fraction of an inch one way or one fraction of an inch the other way. Because I've been on both sides. And
right.
It's just a constant battle. It really is. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was very well said. And one of the qualities of evil is unforgiveness, whereas the qualities of good are forgiveness. There's also the quality of evil, which is very much an important discernment point, is that evil, you can tell the difference between, like, there's three different phases of what you experience in the darker realms. You have ignorant darkness, where someone is ignorantly doing something, but it is dark and it causes harm. You have dominant darkness, where somebody is pretty dominantly dark. They do whatever they want to do. They don't intend to cause harm, but they don't care if they do. Evil enjoys causing harm. So when you spoke about how awful the demons are, this is absolutely true. This is exactly where they're coming from. When you look at the cosmology that God has created and given to us, we have good versus evil, light versus dark. What does the light do? Creation continues to create. What does evil do? It destroys. It continues to destroy. And what happens when you destroy endlessly? It's a simple death. Creation continues to create, which is a life-giving force. Destruction ends in death, whether it's physical death or a spiritual death, which is what you will usually see with evil, where the soul that has been consumed by the evil becomes almost spiritually dead. And that means there's no more forgiveness in their heart. They usually take on things like vengeance, anger, hatred, because these are all the qualities of the demons. And the qualities of the light would be, the opposite. And so you see this continual flowing of how that energy moves. And we have to be very much aware of how we are moving within those spheres of energy. And we can discern a lot of it by recognizing the types of actions and feelings that are related to the backwards thrust, which is darkness and evil, or the forward movement, which is God, creation, and the light. And it's real. This simplifies it for us as we're trying to discern our own place within that path, especially if we're feeling like we might be being tormented by some dark forces of any kind. We want to look at what exactly am I doing and feeling, because this is going to help you start pinpointing what types of dark forces are affecting you. And it also gives you the opportunity to then engage in spiritual activities that would cultivate the opposite virtue. By cultivating the opposite virtue, you are slowly then eroding the stronghold that that demonic or dark force has in your life, because once they're no longer compatible, so as you cultivate that virtue, you become less and less compatible, then they lose their permission to stay.
Okay, that's a good point. Yes, I understand that. I would like to hear this. This is very good, very, very sound information for people. Yeah,
Thank you.
A lot of people will be angry and they'll say to me, well, how come this is still happening to me when I believe in God, I believe in Jesus? And it happened to me because of a lot of guilt. There was a lot of guilt. When somebody is abused or they're a victim of something, or even just in everyday life, there's so much blame and so much victimization of certain people. There's like one group of people sort of where they want to be bullies, and then there's those who are bullied. And it's really important to understand that the mercy of God is there. And I forget all the time. There are times that I'll be sitting here praying and I'll be like, what am I saying? Just give this all to God. God is God. I'm not God. I have to give it all to God, you know? Mm-hmm. Thank goodness I'm not, because I would screw it up so much. But
I relate.
Yeah, right? No matter how much we learn, something comes into our lives and we're like, wait, I don't get this. Now I have to learn again. How do you have to keep raising yourself up level by level so that God can use you completely until we can hopefully go and be with God. Can you touch upon, if you were done on the other subject, because it's fascinating, I'm so happy you came on, can you touch a little bit about, I know that I love Padre Pio, and I've always, even before I knew who he was, I had a devotion to him. When I was young, I was abused, and I was, in a basement. It doesn't really matter to go in. And I used to see visions of him, and I never knew who he was until I got to be about 22, and I saw one of his the holy card with his picture on it. You know how they have those in the bookstores and stuff.
Right.
He used to buy locate, and I guess that's the same as astral projection or astral travel, out-of-body travel, excuse me. Do you think that? Do you think that when you go, because I see things, I have a lot of visuals. I mean, I will see shapes, I will see shadow figures, I will see demons, and I don't like it. I wish it would stop. Because I don't have a spiritual director, and I need a spiritual director because I don't want to trust myself to see these things and know what to do. They talk, sometimes they talk to me, others seem to be more angelic. But do you think that violence and the things that go on in this world can actually open a portal or another dimension, if that's the right way to put it? I don't know the Catholic way to put it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ironically, the violence that we are seeing all around the world is absolutely the work of the demonic. Think about this. I mean, we have a unique period of time right here where we had the horrific attack in New Zealand on the Muslim worshippers, and then we had this follow-up attack, which was horrific, in Sri Lanka on Christian worshippers. In both cases, the perpetrators really believed, and this is part of how we need to, especially those who are experiencing any type of persecution demonically or struggling with this, they really believed they were doing something that would make them a martyr to God.
I know.
Now, this is important because what does it take to bring someone, in the Catholic faith, we are taught that the moral law is carved into our hearts. And I believe that to be true. But what did it take in terms of the minds of these people being twisted to the point that they believed that committing an act of evil against people that God himself loved and created would please God? There is so much that had to have happened for a person to go from knowing and loving a wonderful God to literally serving Satan and thinking they're serving God. But that's what happened. So usually it's gradual when people are being taken down by the dark side. They're going to be taken down in pieces. It's not going to be blatantly right in your face. You're going to be questioned on one belief at a time. And maybe 2 years, 3 years later, all of a sudden, you don't believe in God anymore, or you've got all this anger and all this vengeance. But, the violence, not only is it another gateway that opens up, it's a gateway that was already there for the violence to be able to be perpetrated in the first place. So, yeah, the people who perpetrate them have to be under the influence of evil to be able to do that. And remember, again, evil is, I enjoy causing harm to others or another human being. One of the things you'll see, like with serial killers, is a lot of them share the same thing about how they really enjoy. It's almost like a high. Some of them, it's even like a sexual experience to kill somebody. That's evil. That's someone who has a possession on some level. There's possessions that require exorcisms, and there's possessions where people have just embraced evil and have become it. And so, we have different types of things. There are people like, most of the time when people actually have a possession that an exorcist would deal with, they didn't intend for it to happen. But someone who's committing violent and vile acts is usually going to be someone who has embraced it, likes causing harm. Those are the characteristics of darkness and evil. So that's the kind of things that we have to look for. Whenever you have a horrific act committed on any location, that location will be charged energetically with those events. And that's part of what, like you experienced in the basement of that house, where whatever happened in that basement, whether it was from your own family or from families who lived in it before, was electrically charging it. I actually lived in a house like 10, 15 years ago, and I was really surprised because there was so much spiritual warfare, and the house was a new house. But what I was able to find out was that it was built on land where there had been several battles during the cavalry and the Indian Wars. And so you go beyond just the house or the building itself and you go to the land. Most people have heard about the burial ground issue. So if
Yep.
you're on a burial ground, that's going to be an issue. But think about other things like battlefields. Um, there's also places where, even more modern day issues, if you are living in a house that used to be used as a meth house, it's going to have terrible, terrible energy. So, some people want to flip those things, and it takes a lot more than doing the physical work to the house to make that house truly habitable safely, because people can be possessed by that sort of thing. Methamphetamine, by its very nature, is a drug that is intended to really scatter the personality and actually make somebody easy to possess. It has those qualities. So there's so many different possibilities. Whether if abuse was committed in a house before you were there, you know what I mean? Depends on the house, the age of the house. A lot of times if you're in a building, you can look up the history of the building, but you also want to look up the history of the land, because that can affect it too. So all these places where these things happen are going to be highly charged for a while. And what we, as people need to be doing is sending a lot of prayer for the healing of those portals that have been opened up. We also need to realize as well that God is a loving and merciful God, and there is no way that those Muslim worshipers or the Christian worshipers who died in the act of praying to him were not going to be welcomed into heaven.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yes, and so we must trust in that as well, because, evil does not get that. That belongs to God. And so they may, as I think it was St. Paul who said, they may take your life, but make sure they don't touch your eternal life, and that is the truth.
It's very, very true, and it is a battle. It's just a battle over and over and over again every day. When I was young, my father would associate with people who, to worship the devil. They were dark witches, and they would teach people how to astrally project and summon demons in certain areas to change I hate to say neighborhoods, but certain places where there was like ley lines or energetic stuff that they needed. I don't really know that much about it, but they would go in and they would actually evangelize these areas with the darker energy that they worshipped. And I think that for me, it's like I keep getting the prompting to pray and to ask angels to come into certain areas. Whether or not it's from God, I don't know. It could just be in my mind, but I doubt it. So I just pray and I ask for angels to be in certain places, and I hope everybody would do that, because that's a horrible thing to actually kill people like that when they're worshiping God. I can't think of anything worse than that. I mean, extremists, you can see where they could have like the strongholds with the false beliefs that you said was perfect when you said that people think that they're doing something good for God when they're committing violence against his people. I can't even imagine how much better to see that. Did I lose you?
I'm still here.
But I think
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry. I know the Skype is weird. But if you could, do you think that there's things that we can do as believers to kind of negate it?
Oh, absolutely. Prayer is a big one. And again, I'm going to go back to the Chaplet of the Divine Mercy. People, be open to learning that. It is a purification prayer. One of the things you said, Christine, that I think is really, really important, one of the darkest things that I have experienced over and over in the lower hell realms are people who practice Satanism.
Yeah, I know. I've seen them.
Yeah, this stuff that you're talking about, the dark stuff, that is the kind of thing that gets people into possession really easily. And there is a very, very, really not nice place for anyone out there who's contemplating that path. I'm just telling you, your reward will suck. It will totally suck.
You're going
And
to be
so
surprised.
I've dealt a lot with people who are involved in things like that and helping them to their afterlife, which was usually in the lowest pits of hell.
Yeah.
Um, and but this type of magical activity and trying to manipulate energy in that way is actually a violation of energetic law. It's a
It,
violation of eternal law.
yeah.
And the whole idea of trying to be God is part of the reason why they end up in such a horrific place, is because in order to go into that space, there is a huge turning away from Christ, because you want to master yourself. You don't want a master. And so that has its own punishment, its own reward. We will put in quotes because it's terrible and it sucks and it's not a reward. It's horrible there. I've been there a few times dealing with these souls, and I'm like, I cannot even fathom having to exist here, but these people are compatible to it. So that's why they're there. But these types of satanic, dark, black magic, occult things are really, really dangerous in terms of the potential for possession or demonic infiltration, because that's actually the purpose of it. They are calling up demons, just like you said. So they're actually calling that up, pulling them up out of the
Yeah.
depths, out of the abyss.
Yeah.
So that becomes extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. And especially in our world today where secularism has taken such hold, people are afraid to even say that, really, because
I
we're
know.
supposed to accept all religions, even if it's Satanism. It's like, uh-uh. I accept a Satanist who wants to inquire and may have a desire to find out the truth. I'll accept that. But I know what I know, and
But
I don't mess with that. And if you do, that is a gateway from hell, literally. It is the worst possible thing you can get involved in, because you are dealing with some of the lowest level forces. And these are the types of demonic forces that do get involved in things like war and pillaging and
yes.
mass slaughters. And, that's where it comes from. It's horrific. It's not just, we go back to, there are people who are dabbling, and I've known people over the years. We've had people who once were Satanists who converted back to Christ.
Mhm.
Um, so we have people that have dabbled, and that's dangerous in and of itself. But, if you're ignorant and you've been dabbling, just stop. Just stop and ask Jesus Christ to help you to purify from it. If you're just, for those who are just like, yeah, I do this because, hey, I'm into this and I believe it and I'm God and I really like all the deviant stuff and, I'm just going to be a deviant, then there's not much you can do for that person until they're willing to see or care, because usually those who are going to occupy those lower realms are those who truly choose it. But there
Yeah.
are people who just play around with it. That's also very dangerous. Dabbling, playing around is very dangerous. But if you are just doing that because you're just curious, just stop. Just stop and turn your attention towards Jesus Christ and get purified before it goes any further. You know what I'm saying?
It's very true. My mother was really abused. My father abused her, and they got into the dark arts. They either were into it or they got into it. Nobody could ever figure it out. But she tied a cingulum around my waist, which is a witch's cord. For lack, I hate to insult witches because not all of them do that. And what she did was she never touched my waist, but she attached demons on my physical body. But it was an energy cord. It was a cord, and it bothered me and it tortured me for probably like 30 years. And
Wow.
she didn't do it with the intention of to hurt me. She didn't do it with an intention of hatred or evil. She did it out of fear. But her being manipulated, thinking that when you put a cord on somebody, you're putting reins on them. You're trying to keep them from going forward. She thought that that was a good thing to do, I knew it wasn't because it hurt, I can tell you that. And this was passed down through generations. And after, um, that's what led me to mostly seek a formal exorcism. But years later, my mother died in 2015, and when she died, all the things that I saw coming around her, she never, as far as I know, she never sought God. She never changed her thinking that what she was doing was right. But all the beings that were around, the things that she was seeing as she was dying, I was like, let's call a priest. Because she was Catholic all her childhood. She didn't want to talk to the priest. I was like, let me do some Reiki. That's not Catholic, and she wouldn't let anybody do anything at all. And I really cringe to think where she is. But people don't understand the ramifications of what they do when they mess around with that.
Yeah.
If they think it's good or not, it doesn't make it good,
Right. And even with one of the things that I was shown very clearly, and some people are uncomfortable hearing this, but even those who practice what they call white witchcraft,
Yeah.
it is a violation of eternal law, and it's not okay. I was shown this in a horrific experience, and the reason why is because any of these types of things they involve manipulating energy to bring about our own will. Even so, a white witch would probably say, but I'm doing this for healing somebody. Well, use prayer if you want to work towards healing, because prayer is different, because it is an invocation to God, asking God that if it is His will that this person be healed, that He sends that kind of energy down. When we try to take control ourselves, we are literally cutting ourselves off from the influx of the Holy Spirit. And so that's why energetically, even those who practice the lighter side of those occult arts are going to be running into some murky water. Even though they might think it's no big deal, I just worship the earth is beautiful. I agree with all that. There's a lot of things that are true, and the things that people who practice those things embrace, but they don't recognize the very subtle difference between being aligned with God's will versus trying to impart your own.
Yeah.
And that's where disobedience comes in. That's the great fall. That's where we have to watch what we're doing. We don't want to manipulate things that are not meant to be altered. God determines that. And if you become a really prayerful person, if you're supposed to work in energy, God will lead you, but you'll only be able to alter the things that the Lord chooses, not what you choose. You know what I mean?
It's true.
And so we have to recognize that. We have to remember that the fall came about from disobedience. And it's really that simple, that we must remain obedient to God and remember that what we are is what we are. A lot of these occult practices, and especially when you get to the really dark stuff, the satanic stuff, it's all going back to, the Lucifer idea, which was, I want to be like God.
Yeah.
It is when we embrace our humanity in its fullest sense and our connection as a human being to our Lord Jesus Christ, we enter into a synergistic agreement with the light that gives us a certain amount of protection as well from these things. We have to remember, we don't need, not only do we not have the capacity to be like God, we don't need to be God. Thank God God exists, and we're just these, there's the humility of just accepting our human condition is really important when it comes to the spiritual warfare, and especially as it relates to any of these dark satanic or occult practices or witchcraft, in that it's important to remove the idea from your mind that you need to alter things around you. You need to change things around you of your own accord. You want to work with a power that comes from above, not a power that comes from below. And that's, it's really an energetic thing. I know it's hard to picture or to completely understand, but it is a very fine line.
Well, I read about people wanting to, I like candles, I use oils, but I don't ever try to manipulate anybody's energy field or their free will, because I don't know what God's will is. And
Right.
the only way that I use it is to make myself feel closer to the Holy Spirit or the energy, whatever you want to call it. But when you overstep that boundary, like my mother did, unfortunately, whatever was in her mind was obviously something. I can't judge her. I don't know what happened in her life. Something probably happened to her, but it caused me great suffering. And I tell people that, and some people actually get mad because they think that there's something like justice. We don't know why things happen to us. A lot of times we think something is negative. In this day and age, we think everybody wants quick solutions. They want what they get. And, the political arena and social society says, oh, you deserve everything and everybody's a victim. And we're coming away from being close to God and understanding, picking up our cross and following Jesus. It's not going to be a pleasant thing. It's going to hurt. It's going to stink. We're going to have to go in some very dark areas. But we have to follow God's will, and it's very, very hard for people to do that. But that's where the true empowerment comes in, and we can face those beings that I know you see them, I know you sense them, and I know that you've had to work to help people's lives to be clear of that, and this is what we want to do. This conversation is so good. I get so excited I lose my train of thought.
I relate. And I love candles, and I use essential oils, and I use, I like to do wax melts. And, ironically, one of the reasons I love the essential oils and the incense is because I wrote a book called Fragrance Mysticism, which ironically was titled about the fact that when you're traveling in the higher spheres, there are these beautiful fragrances of roses and flowers, and so I like to have those scents in my home because it reminds me of the beauty of heaven. But also down in the lower spheres of hell, there are the opposite, the putrid smells, the vomit, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
And so what these things provide for us is the opportunity to see the difference between the two. And, and it's interesting how you talk about what happened with your mother. And one thing I would say about that is to, again, trust in God's mercy, that God understood, and that she is being taken care of according to his will. That God is this beautiful, forgiving, merciful being, a father who loves us. And I have seen so many cases of people in really difficult circumstances after life, and God has this beautiful system where every possible configuration is handled with perfection. And so whatever happened to her, in her earlier life, or whatever misjudgments she may have made, I've even seen in the lower hell realms where people, once they have a desire to go forward, help is sent. David said in the Psalms, in the highest heavens you are there, and in the lowest of hells yet you still are there. And that is so true. That is so true, because the moment a soul asks for help, and this is part of the reason when you hear about near-death experiences, and if you hear about some of the near-death experiences of people who either went into the black voids or into purgatories or hells, and a lot of people who are atheists who said they didn't believe in God, they, at some point in their experience, got on their knees and prayed to God for help, and it was immediate. Christ appeared, they were given assistance. This is the way it works all throughout the cosmos. And, so taking that, anyone who might be listening who is feeling oppressed in some way, possibly possessed, make sure you don't forget you have the power at any given moment right now just to say, God, I need your help. And he will send help, whether you're aware of it or not. It will come. And so remember, you can always do that no matter what point of the juncture and the journey that you are at. But we want to remind ourselves and remember there are these fine lines where people can get lost or slightly turned into the wrong direction. So like, for instance, someone who practices maybe the white witchcraft, it's a small turn. It's not completely, but then you can take other subsequent steps either to go further down or to turn it and go back up. So all of these things become stepping stones, and they're either stepping stones towards heaven or stepping stones in another direction that most of us would really not like to go. And so we have to be careful, because our entire world is created in a manner where the temptations and the things are presented to us as if they are not a hindrance to our path. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? No big deal. But what happens is, if there is no discernment, something that seems like a small decision can then turn into another decision that tweaks it just a little bit more in the wrong direction. Do you see what I'm saying, Christine?
Yes, I really
And then
do.
it becomes a subsequent tweaking, because that's usually how the dark side will work. It's how Satan will work on souls. And it is usually how possessions eventually occur. But, people experience the obsessions and all these other things before that occurs. And that's what you're seeing, are these little steps, If you can just get your, the dark side is looking at it as, if I can just tweak the way you think about one thing,
Right.
then I keep you there for just a little bit, and then I'm going to tweak one more thing. And then you just start having subsequent tweakings, and before you know it, you've lost everything. You've lost everything that you once believed in, and everything that used to hold you up and keep you in that inflow from heaven above to earth below, which was the Holy Spirit. And then you end up in a totally different energetic thrust, which is the downwards thrust with the flow towards the lower spheres, and it becomes harder and harder then to discern, because the inflow that's coming in is totally different than what you used to receive when you were connecting with the Holy Spirit. You're receiving things that are like different emotions, the anger, the vengeance, the hatred, the pride. And
Yeah.
that can really tear you down, and then before you know it, it happens so fast.
It really does, and it's a constant thing. I mean, there's people who listen to my show who are being brutalized by people who are in satanic cults, and we have to, as spiritual people and as Christians and as Catholics and as Baptists, and I don't care what you are, if you're doing the light, the energy work, the light energy work, you're for God. These people deserve our help. None of us deserves heaven more than another person. We're all worthy of the mercy of God, because God gave us that mercy for everybody, not just Catholics or Muslims or Protestants, but for everyone. And
We have to remember, God created us all. And so whatever our differences, our similarities are always greater.
yeah. But let's go, and I wish you could stay. I wish we could do more, but we only have the 2 hours. But I want to give your website is outofbodytravel.org. And do you have any events that you want to mention that are coming up?
Well, I'd like to mention, if you're just getting started, go ahead and download Come to Wisdom's Door and the Mysteries of the Redemption. And we also have a course of study that's on the site that's totally free, that you can take at your own pace, that will help you to take a lot of these concepts and expand upon them in a way that will hopefully open your heart and your mind and help you with the spiritual warfare. I also have a book specifically called Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons. It's in the Mystic Knowledge series. So if you are experiencing any type of oppression of any sort, you might want to go directly to that book. And again, they're all downloadable for free. So you can download them on the Out of Body Books page. at outofbodytravel.org.
I highly, highly suggest that you go to the website and look at these books. I don't want to be tooting my own horn, but I can usually tell when something is very good, and this is very, very good. This is absolutely going to help you. And can people contact you? You do counseling, you do spiritual direction?
I do. My email address is right at the top of the website, Marilyn Hughes at outofbodytravel.org, and you can sign up for spiritual counseling at the website as well. And yes, feel free to email me with any questions or concerns, or even if you just want to share what's going on with you, and we can talk about it and see if we can come up with a plan. So yeah, feel free to email me at any time.
And I like your audio files. They're very, very nice. You have a lot of these audio files here. This is what you're talking. Oh, these are your books. Yeah, these are the books. That's right. And you have all these books that are here. I got to read them all. I'm going to have to read them. I know
also, for people who do want audio files, we do have them on Audible as well. So if you prefer hearing books to reading them, you can do that as well. And digital, all of that stuff. It's all available there.
Very, very helpful. So the website is outofbodytravel.org. Marilyn, I can't thank you enough. I hope that you would consider coming on again.
I would love to.
Yeah.
Love to.
More deeper subjects. My listeners will be very, very blessed from your guest and your knowledge, your knowledge. And anytime, please, and thank you all for listening, and say a prayer for everyone, because this is hard work. And take care, everyone. Until next Wednesday, God bless.
Thank you.